In 1990, the brutal murder of Gregg Smart shocked the nation and led to a highly publicized trial that revealed a shocking tale of deception, manipulation, and murder. The investigation revealed that Pamela Smart had been involved in a sordid affair with a teenage student, Billy Flynn, who, along with 2 other teenagers, was recruited to carry out the murder. The trial captivated the nation and sparked a heated debate about the ethics of teacher-student relationships and the influence of media on the criminal justice system. So, fasten your seatbelts as we take you on a roller coaster ride through one of the most gripping criminal cases in American history. Pamela Wojas was born on August 16, 1967, in Coral Gables, Florida. When she was a child, her family moved to New Hampshire, and she grew up in the town of Rye. Pamela was a popular student in high school, where she was involved in cheerleading and theater. After graduating, Pamela attended Florida State University, where she majored in communications. She later moved back to New Hampshire and started working as a media services director at Winnicott High School in Hampton. It was there that Pamela met Gregg Smart, who worked as a school media director. They began dating shortly after meeting, and in 1989, they got married. After their marriage, Pamela changed her last name to that of her husband's. Pamela and Gregg Smart's marriage appeared to be a happy one on the surface, but behind closed doors, there were significant issues. Pamela had been having an affair with a 15-year-old student, Billy Flynn, for several months leading up to the murder. She had reportedly become unhappy with her marriage to Gregg, feeling that he was not adventurous or exciting enough for her. Gregg, on the other hand, was described as a kind and caring person who doted on his wife. He was completely unaware of Pamela's affair and had no idea that she was involved in any wrongdoing. Pamela, meanwhile, was leading a double life, presenting a public facade of a happy marriage while engaging in an illicit affair with a minor. It's important to note that much of this information was revealed after Gregg's murder, and there is no way to know for sure what their marriage was like before the events that led to his death. However, the evidence presented during the trial painted a picture of a troubled marriage and a wife who was willing to go to extreme lengths to get what she wanted. Billy Flynn was a student at Winnicott High School, where Pamela Smart worked as a media services director. Billy was known to be a troubled teenager in high school. He had a history of drug and alcohol abuse and was known to be rebellious and a troublemaker. According to reports, Flynn had been in trouble with the law for various offenses. Despite his problems, Flynn was also known to be charismatic and charming, which may have been part of what drew Pamela to him. Pamela and Billy met at Project Self-Esteem, a school drug awareness program where they were both volunteers. According to testimony during the trial, Pamela initiated the relationship and was the more dominant partner. Flynn was just 15 years old at the time, and Pamela was 22. They began flirting, and soon the relationship turned into a sexual one. It's important to mention that Billy and Pamela's sexual relationship started when he was 16, which is the minimum age of consent in New Hampshire. It's unclear exactly when Pamela began thinking about murdering Gregg, but there is evidence to suggest that she had been planning the murder for several months leading up to the crime. Pamela had reportedly confided in several friends about her desire to kill her husband and had even discussed the idea with Cecilia Pierce, one of the teenagers who would later become involved in the murder plot. She had also taken out a $140,000 life insurance policy on Gregg, which she stood to benefit from in the event of his death. The actual plan to murder Gregg was hatched in April 1990, just a few weeks before the crime was carried out. Before going forward, we should learn about 4 more people who were involved with the plot. Pete Randall was a 17-year-old student at Winnicott High School. Raymond Fowler was an 18-year-old student at the same school. Vance Latomy was a 16-year-old who had dropped out of high school and was living with his parents in Seabrook, New Hampshire, a town located just south of Hampton. Billy had recruited Vance, Pete, and Raymond to help in the murder. In return, Pamela promised the teenagers money, drugs, and the chance to become famous if they carried out the murder. Cecilia Pierce was a 16-year-old student who was interning under Pamela at the media department of Winnicott High School. Pamela had confided the details of her unhappy marriage to Gregg with Cecilia, and had even told Cecilia about her intention to murder Gregg. Cecilia also knew about Pamela and Billy's relationship. Pamela had asked her to procure a firearm to murder Gregg. However, the firearm that was eventually used in the murder was supplied by Vance Latomy. Most importantly, Cecilia knew about the plan and had participated in conversations on how to carry out the murder. On the evening of May 1st, 1990, Pamela Smart had left a sliding glass door open at the condominium she shared with her husband, Gregg. While Pamela was away at a meeting, Billy Flynn and Pete Randall entered the condo through the unlocked door and found Gregg in the master bedroom. The two men forced Gregg to his knees in the foyer, with Pete holding him down at knife point while Billy fired a .38 caliber bullet into his head. Following the murder, Pete and Billy staged the house to make it look like a burglary and made their escape in a getaway car driven by Vance Latomy. Both Vance and Raymond Fowler were waiting outside in the car while the murder was taking place. Pamela returned home later that night and called the police, claiming that she had arrived home to find her husband dead. The police initially treated the case as a home invasion robbery gone wrong. However, they found no signs of forced entry and no items were missing from the home. The police also investigated known burglars in the area, but no leads emerged. As the investigation progressed, the police began to uncover evidence that pointed towards a more complex and sinister motive. One of the first red flags for the police was Pamela's behavior after the murder. She appeared overly composed and did not exhibit the typical emotions of a grieving spouse. She had asked for a private funeral, had requested to have the casket closed during the service, and had mentioned that she didn't want to attend the funeral because she did not want to be seen crying. Pamela did, however, end up attending the funeral. All these behaviors seemed unusual to the investigators. On May 14, 1990, the police received a phone call from someone who claimed that Cecilia Pierce had told them that Pamela was involved in Gregg Smart's murder. The caller did not identify themselves and did not provide any further details. This tip prompted the police to investigate Pamela's involvement in the murder. On June 4, 1990, Cecilia was taken in for questioning at the Derry Police Department. She was initially hesitant to cooperate and claimed that she did not know anything about the murder. However, the police persisted. They told her that if she did not cooperate, she could face charges of first-degree murder, and if she did cooperate, she could potentially receive immunity. Cecilia initially refused to wear a wire, fearing for her safety and the safety of her family. The police then brought in her mother and stepfather, who also encouraged her to cooperate. Cecilia finally agreed to wear the wire. Over the course of several weeks, Cecilia wore the wire during conversations with Pamela. In the recordings, Pamela discussed her involvement in Gregg's murder. In one conversation, Cecilia told Pamela that she knew about her affair with Billy, and Smart replied that it was a mistake and that it shouldn't have happened. Pamela also asked Cecilia if she had talked to the police and expressed her fear that she would be caught. In another conversation, Pamela talked about how she had manipulated Billy into killing Gregg and how she had planned the murder. These recordings were later used as evidence against Pamela in court. Pamela was arrested on August 1, 1990, and charged with being an accomplice to first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and witness tampering. Pamela Smart's trial began on March 4, 1991, almost a year after Gregg's murder. The trial was held at Rockingham County Superior Court in New Hampshire. The prosecution argued that Pamela had seduced Billy into killing her husband so that she could collect his insurance money and be free to continue her affair with Billy. The prosecution also presented the recorded conversations between Cecilia and Pamela, where she discussed the murder plot, as evidence. The defense argued that Pamela was innocent and that the murder was committed by Billy and his teenage accomplices, without her knowledge or involvement. The defense tried to discredit the credibility of the prosecution's witnesses by highlighting their criminal pasts and drug use. The trial lasted for 3 weeks, during which the prosecution called more than 100 witnesses, and the defense called fewer than 20 witnesses. Pamela did not testify in her defense. Billy Flynn was the key witness for the prosecution in the trial. He testified against Pamela and recounted the details of how he, along with Pete Randall, had entered the Smarts' condo and murdered Gregg. Flynn described how he held a .38 caliber gun to Gregg's head while Pete held him down with a knife. Billy testified that Pamela had been the mastermind behind the murder and that she had manipulated him and the other co-conspirators into carrying out the crime. He said that Pamela had promised him a future together with her after Gregg's death and that he had agreed to participate in the murder because of his infatuation with her. She allegedly told him she needed her husband killed because she feared she would lose everything if they divorced. Billy also spoke about the events leading up to the murder, including how he and Pamela had carried on an affair and how Pamela had convinced him to kill Gregg. He described how they had planned the murder together, including details such as the location, timing, and how to make it look like a home invasion. Billy's testimony was crucial in securing Pamela's conviction. The jury found Pamela guilty of being an accomplice to first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and witness tampering. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The trial received widespread media coverage and was dubbed the trial of the century by some. The case garnered national attention, and the media circus surrounding the trial was intense. Television cameras were allowed in the courtroom, and the trial was broadcast live on court TV. The trial was covered extensively in the local and national news, with reporters providing daily updates on the proceedings. The media focused on Pamela's affair with Billy and portrayed her as a manipulative seductress who had convinced a young boy to kill her husband. The media also highlighted the salacious details of the affair and the fact that Pamela had seduced a student under her care. The media coverage of the trial also fueled a public frenzy, with people lining up to get into the courtroom and others protesting outside. The case was discussed on talk shows and news programs, with pundits weighing in on Pamela's guilt or innocence. The trial inspired several adaptations in the form of books, TV shows, and movies. One of the most notable adaptations was the 1995 movie To Die For, starring Nicole Kidman. The movie was based on Joyce Maynard's book of the same name, which was loosely inspired by Pamela Smart's story. The movie focused on the character of Suzanne Stone, played by Kidman, a small-town girl with big dreams of becoming a television personality. She becomes involved with a group of high school students and convinces one of them, played by Joaquin Phoenix, to murder her husband. The movie was not a direct retelling of Pamela's story, but it did borrow elements from the case, including a woman who used her sexuality to manipulate others and a murder plot involving teenagers. Kidman's character was also loosely based on Pamela's persona, particularly her desire for fame and attention. The movie was well received by critics and was a box office success, earning Kidman a Golden Globe Award for Best Actress. However, the movie was criticized by some for its depiction of women, particularly the way it portrayed Suzanne Stone as a cold, calculating killer. Pamela Smart was convicted of being an accomplice to murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She is currently serving her sentence at Bedford Hills Correctional Facility in New York. Smart maintains her innocence and has appealed her conviction multiple times, but all appeals have been denied. Billy Flynn, who pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was the triggerman in the killing, was sentenced to 40 years in prison with the possibility of parole after serving 25 years. In 2015, Flynn was released from prison after serving 25 years of his sentence. Raymond Fowler, who was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after serving 15 years, was released on parole in 2003 after serving 11 years of his sentence. Pete Randall was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder and was sentenced to 28 years in prison. He was released on parole in 2005 after serving 15 years of his sentence. Vance Latamy was convicted of being an accomplice to murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after serving 30 years. He was released on parole in 2017 after serving 27 years of his sentence. Cecilia Pierce was granted immunity for her testimony against Pamela during the trial. After the trial, Cecilia's mother and stepfather moved the family to Jefferson City, Missouri. She has since gotten married and changed her name and lives privately away from the public eye. Pamela Smart is serving a life sentence at the maximum security Bedford Hills Correctional Facility for Women in Westchester County, New York. She was transferred there in 1993 from the New Hampshire State Prison for Women in Goffstown. The reasons for her transfer are unclear, but a senior assistant in the state attorney general's office claimed it was due to discipline problems. Smart had accrued 22 disciplinary reports, all but 2 of them for minor offenses. Her family claims they were never informed of the transfer. Smart has completed 2 master's degrees while in prison, tutored other inmates, and campaigned for women's rights in prison. In 1996, she was severely beaten by fellow inmates Mona Graves and Gania Miller, which resulted in a fractured nose and a broken eye socket. The 2 inmates beat Smart after they accused her of snitching on them about their prison relationship. In 2003, photos of a scantily clad Smart were published in the National Enquirer. She filed a complaint against the prison and was placed in solitary confinement for 2 months. Smart sued, claiming that the photos were taken by a prison guard who had raped her, but the lawsuit was dismissed. In 2004, Smart and fellow inmate Carolyn Warmis sued officials of Bedford Hills, claiming sexual harassment and sexual assault by a corrections officer who they said coerced them into posing for the suggestive pictures published in 2003. On November 5, 2009, a U.S. District Court judge approved a $23,000 judgment to Smart from the state of New York. Smart took part in a writer's workshop while in prison, and her writing was exhibited in the 2003 PBS documentary What I Want My Words to Do to You. In April 2004, the first U.S. Court of Appeals upheld a 2002 ruling by a federal judge who rejected her federal habeas petition. Prior to her federal appeal, Smart had exhausted all judicial appeals at the state level. In July 2005, the New Hampshire Executive Council unanimously denied a pardon request for any conditions the governor may seek to impose. Smart indicated in an interview with ABC News that she is afraid of growing old and dying in prison and would rather have been given the death penalty. Gregg's family was devastated by his murder and the subsequent trial. They strongly believed in Pamela's guilt and felt that justice had been served with her life sentence. Gregg's brother Dean has spoken out against Smart and her supporters, calling them gullible and arguing that they were being fooled by her manipulative nature. They were appalled by the actions of Smart and the teenagers involved in the crime and felt that they had all shown a complete lack of remorse. Do you guys remember this case? Also, what did you think about the media coverage of the trial? Let me know in the comments. I would love to hear what you have to say. Please consider giving this video a like if you liked it. That really helps with the algorithm. Additionally, consider subscribing to the channel for more true crime. Till next time, signing off. This has been Christina.